em oferecimento de Surfshark. Mano, isso aqui é educação, tá? Isso aqui é educação. Educação, tá? Prepare-se para ser educado.
Files is brought to you by Surfshark. Despite it being humanity.
Vão ocorrer também, provavelmente, alguns erros de tradução aí, velho. Porque, meu irmão, eu não sou formado professor de inglês. Então, se achar ruim, vai tomar no... Você tá pronto pra entender que a Lua é oca e é uma espaçonave? Você tá pronto pra isso? Tirem as crianças da sala! Essa é uma stream para maiores de 18 anos.
Humanity's constant companion through all of recorded time, the moon is still a mystery. Science hasn't been able to explain how the moon was formed, its unusual orbit, its distance from us, its density, its composition, its structure. These are all still questions. Now, there are theories about the moon that solve some of these puzzles, but they don't solve all of them. There's only one theory that answers every scientific question about the moon. Just one. That the moon is a hollow artificial structure brought here by someone else. Let's find out why. Let's start at the beginning. We're taught that the moon has been here forever, but there's controversy about this because scientists can't agree on how the moon was formed in the first place. The first theory of how the moon became linked to the Earth is the capture theory. It says the moon was just floating along, drifted near the
PS, uma atenção, tem várias teorias diferentes, então vamos enumerar e lembrar todas. A primeira é a teoria da captura. Então vamos lá. Isso é ciência, tá? Isso aqui não é lua oca ainda. Isso aqui é um argumento bem organizado, bem planejado. Tem as teorias que vêm primeiro, são as teorias que a ciência entende que são possibilidades. Não, nem é lua oca ainda. Então vamos lá, é hora de fique atrás de fique para chegar na super fique, entenderam? Salve Peixinique, tá bom?
We're taught that the moon has been here forever. But there's controversy about this because scientists can't agree on how the moon was formed in the first place. The first theory of how the moon became linked to the Earth is the capture theory. It says the moon was just floating along, drifted near the Earth, and was pulled into orbit. This is almost impossible. Another explanation.
Ciência! Ciência! A Lua tava de rolê e a Terra captou e colocou em órbita. Ciência! Essa é a opção número 1, tá? Vamos para a próxima.
Explanation is the accretion theory, that the moon and Earth formed out of dust clouds in the early solar system. But when systems form through accretion, they share similar traits. If the moon was formed this way, it would have an iron core, like the Earth. It would spin on an axis, like the Earth. But neither of these are true.
A outra, então, é que tinha nuvens e dessas nuvens se separou dois objetos diferentes. Um é a Lua e outro é a Terra. Só que as coisas que tem na Lua não tem na Terra e as coisas que tem na Terra não tem na Lua. Essa é ciência número 2.
Fission hypothesis was popular for a while, and this says the early Earth was spinning so fast that the moon was formed out of rock in the Pacific Ocean that was flung into space.
A terceira teoria é que a Terra girava tão rápido que tacou pedra para o espaço e a pedra e a Lua vieram essas pedras que a Terra girou tanto que tacou pedra e as pedras se juntaram e viraram a Lua. Essa é a número 3. Ciência! Ciência! Então vamos lá, atenção. 1. A Lua estava por aí, a Terra captou e colocou em órbita. 2. Tinha um monte de nuvem maluca formando o sistema solar, e aí tava juntinho, Terra aqui, Lua aqui, só que uma não tem nada a ver com a outra. 3. A Terra gira tão rápido que tacou pedra pro espaço e virou Lua.
But we later learned that moon rock is much older than the bottom of the ocean, so this is unlikely.
Opa!
So fast that the moon was formed out of rock in the Pacific Ocean that was flung into space. But we later learned that moon rock is much older than the bottom of the oceans.
A rocha lunar é mais velha do que as pedras do fundo do oceano. Lembre-se disso.
So this is unlikely. The most popular explanation is the giant impact theory. This says that a large object about the size of Mars smashed into the proto-Earth. The debris field from the collision coalesced to create the Earth-Moon system. Again, these conditions...
E a quarta? um objeto, mais uma vez, vamos lá. É a teoria do grande impacto.
This is unlikely.
Essa é a teoria aclamada, tá? A teoria aclamada é essa.
So fast that the moon was
Tá,
formed out
próximo.
of rock in the
A
Pacific
teoria
Ocean that was flung
aclamada.
into space. But we later learned that moon rock is much older than the bottom of the ocean, so this is unlikely. The most popular explanation is the giant impact theory. This says that a large object about the size of Mars smashed into the proto-Earth. The debris field from the collision coalesced to create the Earth-Moon system.
Então, um bagulho do tamanho de Marte bateu no início da Terra e G ponto.
Again, these conditions would have to be so perfect that the odds are
Astronomical.
right. Now, a recent
E as odds para isso acontecer e virar exatamente o que virou são insanas. E sim, o peixe fala. Essas são as 4. Se eu falasse para vocês antes de começar isso aqui, essas 4, vocês iam falar fique para todas. Começa daí. Se eu viro e falo que a Lua tava de bobeira pegando, fique. Se vira que a Terra gira muito rápido, fique. Se Marte, um objeto tamanho de Marte bate na Terra, fique. Começa daí. Segue.
theory is a combination of all of these. That a large object collided with the Earth about 4.5 billion years ago, essentially vaporizing it. And this vapor is called a synestia. And the synestia was spinning very rapidly, forming a torus. And the moon formed on the edge of this torus.
Whoa, hold on. Taurus? What's a Taurus?
Well, this shape is a torus.
That looks like a donut.
It does, but in geometry, if you revolve a circle around an axis in three-dimensional space, it's called a torus.
Yeesh, and you wonder why you're not popular at parties.
I'm very popular at parties, aren't I? So, we still don't know how the moon was created. You would think that actually going to the moon and collecting rock samples would solve some
Well.
of these puzzles. But when moon rocks were brought back and studied, it only created more questions.
Então, só para deixar claro uma coisa aqui. Essa teoria, ela leva em consideração que o homem foi para a Lua. Porque se não tivesse ido para a Lua, não teria pego as pedras da Lua e teria estudado elas. Beleza? Então, eu sei que também tem gente que fica meio pá com essa história de homem foi para a Lua, não foi para a Lua. Isso aqui é baseado na premissa que o homem foi para a Lua. E a ciência diz que o homem foi para a Lua.
Since landing on the moon in
Só aqui, ó, é mais fácil explicar. Deixa eu levantar um pouco minha câmera. É mais fácil explicar a não existência da Lua do que a sua existência. Quem falou isso foi nada mais, nada menos do que Robin Brett da NASA. Robin Brett.
Since landing on the moon in 1969,
The moon landing was as fake as a teenager's Instagram.
I knew you were going to do this. Look, do you like the idea that the moon is a hollow spaceship?
Well, yeah, I gotta admit, I do kind of like this idea.
Okay, so for us to explore this theory, you need to concede that we went to the moon.
Fine, I will concede we went to the moon.
Thank you.
But those were unmanned missions. The landings were actually filmed in a studio in Burbank, California.
Fine, I'll take what I can get. Moon rocks and soil samples brought back from the moon are strange. On Earth, the newest rocks are at the surface, and the rock gets older as you go deeper. Now, this is obvious and logical. But on the moon, the soil on the surface is older than the rocks underneath. And the surface rocks are older than the rock underneath them. It's backwards. The only way this happens on Earth is when we drill, dig, and mine, bringing older material to the surface.
Pausa. Mais uma vez, na Terra, o solo mais fresco, mais recente, fica aí em cima, e quanto mais desce, é mais velho. Na Lua é ao contrário. O mais velho tá na superfície e o mais jovem tá embaixo. Isso acontece quando no planeta Terra, quando tem perfuração e escavação, trazendo material mais antigo para a superfície. Então já começa daí, tá? Começa daí. Você tá prestando atenção? Seu
But we see this all over the moon. Now, if the moon was somehow hollowed out, older rock would be on top. But the list of anomalies goes on. Typical planetary structures have denser materials toward the core and lighter materials toward the surface. On the moon, this too is reversed, and no one could really explain why. The moon's surface is pockmarked by
Vamos lá. Na Terra, o centro é mais denso que a superfície. Na Lua, é ao contrário, que nem o rolê lá do solo.
asteroid impacts that have happened for billions of years, so you would expect the rock around the impact craters to be different ages. But there is a strange uniformity in the age of these rocks. The chemical makeup of lunar dust is also very odd. If lunar dust is the result of billions of years of impacts, why does it have a different chemical makeup of the rocks around it? The moon doesn't have a magnetic field, yet moon rocks are strongly magnetized. The Earth is 4.6 billion years old, but the oldest rocks we found are much younger than that. Moon rocks are older, much older. Some rocks have been dated to the very beginning of the solar system, and some are said to be even older than that.
Os bagulho que tem na Terra é mais novo do que os bagulho que tem na Lua. E as pedras lá são magnetizadas e lá não tem campo magnético. Segue.
Uranium-236 and Neptunium-237 are found on the moon. This is notable because those radioactive elements don't occur naturally. The only way we see those isotopes on Earth is if we create them. Titanium, chromium, and zirconium are rare on Earth, but these are found in abundance on the moon. If the Earth and moon were formed together, why such a big discrepancy? And those metals happen to be some of the most strongest materials that are known to exist, and they're highly resistant to corrosion. If you wanted to reinforce a structure, these are the metals you would use. This structural reinforcement
Se você quisesse criar uma estrutura, esses seriam os metais que você usa. Metais super resistentes, que são raros na Terra e que tem para dar e vender na Lua.
could explain why moon craters all seem to be the same depth, no matter how wide they are. Shouldn't craters of different sizes be of different depths? It's as if there's a resilient metallic shell just beneath the surface of the moon, preventing anything from penetrating further. Now, if there was some type of instruments on the moon's surface that could detect seismic activity, we could test the hollow moon theory by intentionally colliding objects with the moon.
E aí entra a minha noção de lua oca pré esse vídeo. Por quê? Porque eu já suspeitava desse rolê de lua oca. Tem que ver isso aí. Por quê? Porque o cara tá falando que é como se tivesse uma camada que protege o interno e tem os bagulho lá em cima. E aí, o que acontece? Você pode medir a densidade de um objeto tacando coisa contra ele e a maneira que ele reverbera mostra a densidade. Isso é ciência.
Sounds like a setup. We did this, didn't we?
We did.
And is it hollow?
Well,
Heyo!
Tacaram coisa contra a Lua. Opa, opa, opa! Parece que a Lua é mais uma esfera oca do que uma esfera homogênea. Dr. Gordon MacDonald, diretamente da NASA.
after returning to the command module, the Apollo 12 crew intentionally released the lunar lander, crashing it into the moon's surface. Then something very unexpected happened. Seismic measurements showed that the moon rang like a bell and reverberated for more than an hour. This was with a very small object compared.
Então teve a missão Apollo 12. E aí os caras pousam. Quando os caras pousam, a Lua começa a reverberar como se fosse um sino. E o que eles tacaram é uma coisinha desse tamanho aqui em relação à Lua.
Compared to the size of the moon. So during Apollo 13, an even heavier object was crashed into the surface. This time, the moon rang for over 3 hours, and vibrations traveled to a depth of 20 miles. This doesn't happen on Earth. Reverberations last only a few minutes because of the Earth's density. And on Earth, vibrations slow down as they move toward the Earth's center, where material is denser. But the vibrations on the moon actually got faster around 40 miles down, indicating the interior of the moon is not only far less dense, but perhaps has large hollow cavities. The density of the moon is something that's difficult to explain. The moon is about 25% the size of the Earth, but it's only about 1% of the Earth's density.
A Lua é 25% do tamanho da Terra, mas tem 1% da densidade da Terra. Os bagulho, quando pousa na Terra, não treme porque tem densidade no centro. Lá ficou reverberando durante horas porque tem menos densidade no centro. Tamo legal até aí? Não era isso que vocês queriam? Agora vai todo mundo sair doidão dessa porra.
If the moon were a hollow shell, this would explain that. Besides the density issue, the moon has a lot of characteristics and coincidences that we don't see anywhere else. The moon is actually more like a planet than a moon. At 1/4 the Earth's size, no other object in the solar system has a moon this large. This occurs nowhere else, not in our solar system or any other solar system that we found. And the moon orbits much more closely than it should. And its orbit is also a mystery. It's the only object we've ever.
Então, vamos lá. A Lua tá mais para um planeta do que para uma Lua. É o maior objeto que fica em órbita do sistema solar. E além disso, tá perto pra caralho.
Observed with a near perfectly circular orbit. We don't see this anywhere else either. Because of this near perfect orbit and its size and distance from the Earth, the moon appears in the sky as almost the exact same size as the sun. This is what allows us to have eclipses. Our distance to the sun is 400 times our distance to the moon, and the size of the sun is 400 times the size of the moon. Could this be a coincidence?
Nah.
Well, when enough coincidences pile up,
E aí tudo se encaixa perfeitamente em perspectiva para rolar as tretas de eclipse, em questão de distância, tamanho e formato.
we may have to adjust our thinking and be a little more open-minded. And that's what
Mente
happened in
aberta.
1970. Two Soviet scientists looked at all the evidence and all these coincidences in 1970. Two Soviet scientists
E aí, quem tem o conhecimento desbalanceado no CS, no game, na Olimpíada e na vida? É a porra dos russos, irmão. Os russos vão trazer uma fita, tá? Os russos, os caras do CIS, os caras manjam, mano. Olha o Jamie aí, caralho.
looked at all the evidence and all these coincidences and came to what they felt was the only logical conclusion. And they agreed that their theory sounded crazy, but said not only is the moon hollow, but it's also a spacecraft that traveled here in the distant past.
E aí os russos, em 1970, chegaram numa conclusão. Não só a Lua é oca, como a Lua é uma espaçonave que viajou para cá em um passado distante. Segue.
So now we have to ask, who built the moon?
Quem fez essa porra? Opa, mais citações aí, ó. Os experimentos lunares da órbita aumentaram o conhecimento sobre a gravitação da Lua e indicaram a assustadora possibilidade que a Lua pode ser oca. Assustadora possibilidade. Quem falou isso? O Dr. Sean Solomon, que é professor de terra e planetária em algum lugar aí. Columbia University.
Every ancient culture on Earth has stories about the moon, but it's interesting that the further back you go, the fewer stories there are. And if you go back far enough, there are stories that talk about a sky before the moon arrived. Roman and Greek authors in the 5th century BC have stories about the Proselynes, and they lived in an area called Arcadia. And they said they've been here since before there was a moon in.
Vou voltar a essa parte.
Every ancient culture on Earth has stories about the moon, but it's interesting that the further back you go, the fewer stories there are.
Todas as civilizações antigas têm história sobre a Lua, mas quanto mais longe você vai nas civilizações, menos história sobre a Lua tem.
And if you go back far enough, there are stories that talk about a sky before the moon
E se você voltar, tem história sobre como era o céu antes de existir a Lua.
arrived. Roman and Greek authors in the 5th century BC have stories about the Proselynes, and they lived in an area called Arcadia. And they said they've been here since before there was a moon in the heavens. Now, on the other side of the world, the ancient culture of Tiwanaku in Bolivia also refers to a time when there was no moon. The Tiwanaku claim the moon arrived between 11,500.
Os
Não
bolivianos.
vai na cozinha pegar seu chapéu de alumínio.
Não, eu tô dividindo com vocês. Sabe, Percai? Os bolivianos de 13.500 atrás, 13.500 mil anos atrás. Não, 13.500 anos atrás.
And they said they've been here since before there was a moon in the heavens. Now, on the other side of the world, the ancient culture of Tiwanaku in Bolivia also refers to a time when there was no moon. The Tiwanaku claim the moon arrived between 11,500 and 13,000 years ago. If you're into ancient theories as much as I am, you'll recognize that this time coincides perfectly with a period called the Younger Dryas. And all kinds of myths and mysteries are said to have happened during the Younger Dryas, and we'll cover them on this channel. Now, going back to Africa, there are Zulu
Isso entra dentro desse rolê de Younger Dryas aí, que eu suspeito que seja uma super seca.
legends that specifically say the moon is hollow, and living inside is an Zulu legends that specifically say the moon is
Lendas Zulu da África dizem especificamente que a
hollow,
Lua é
and
oca.
living inside is an
Oca.
intelligent race of reptilian extraterrestrials.
E que dentro dela vive uma raça inteligente de extraterrestres reptilianos. Uma lenda Zulu da África.
Lizard people?
Yep,
Lizard people built the moon!
that's what they believe.
Lizard people are very industrious.
They seem to be. The Zulu believe the moon was put into orbit by two brothers who were gods, and this legend is similar to what the Sumerians believed. The Sumerians also had a legend of two brothers, Enki and Enlil, who were called,
Anunnaki!
yup, Anunnaki, the extraterrestrial gods who created mankind.
Everything is falling into place with this one.
Well, you ain't seen nothing yet. How about this? The Zulu also believed that before the moon arrived, the climate of the Earth was very different. There were no seasons, and a blanket of thick water vapor covered the entire planet.
Antes de ter a Lua, não tinha nem várias seasons diferentes, não tinha nem várias estações diferentes. Era seco, com uma camada de vapor que cobria todo o planeta.
And we now know that the moon does stabilize our climate. Without the moon's
E a gente sabe que hoje em dia a Lua estabiliza o nosso clima. Isso é um fato.
gravity, the Earth's axis would wobble. There would be no consistent seasons, no tides, extreme
Olha
weather.
como é que a Terra ia ficar aí se não tivesse Lua. Olha você, eu ia estar assim. A gente ia estar assim. A gente ia estar assim.
Axis would
Ó a Lua
wobble.
vindo,
There would
ó a
be
Lua
no
vindo, ó a
consistent
Lua vindo.
seasons, no tides,
Arrumou.
extreme weather. The presence of the moon is what allows life on Earth to thrive. So, back to the Zulu. The Earth was covered by a thick layer of water vapor, and you could only see the sun through this hazy mist. When the moon was finally placed into orbit, all this water vapor fell at once, and it created a cataclysmic global flood.
Always a flood.
Always.
E aí, quando a Lua entrou na órbita da Terra, organizou essa parada e rolou um dilúvio aqui no rolê todo.
Every time. Every ancient culture has a flood myth, and there's mounting evidence that this did indeed happen during the Younger Dryas. Cultures around the world have myths that are in perfect sync with each other. The coincidences keep piling up.
E todas as culturas têm histórias e mitologias que estão cronologicamente organizadas com esse acontecimento.
The Zulu legend talks about how the arrival of the moon
Metade do vídeo. Como tem gente que estava num ritmo pré-vídeo e gente que já está em outro ritmo agora, admita, você não será julgado.
changed the tides and stabilized the climate. And this is something that wasn't understood by science until the past 100 years. Yet somehow the ancient Zulu were able to make the connection between the moon and the tides and the seasons. All of these myths and legends, plus strange coincidences and anomalies about the moon, start to add up to a compelling theory that the moon is hollow, is artificial, and was placed here by intelligent beings long ago. But coincidences aren't proof, and myths aren't proof. We need to know what's been happening on the moon lately to see if we can make our case with hard evidence. Lucky for us, the evidence is there.
E tem evidência. E tem evidência. Mais citação. A melhor explicação para a Lua é um erro de observação. A Lua nem existe, irmão. Todas as explicações para sua presença têm dificuldades. Quem falou isso? Irving Shapiro, de Harvard. Harvard. Astrofísico de Harvard.
Science tells us that the moon is a cold, lifeless place. It has no atmosphere. There hasn't been seismic activity for millions of years. Its core, unlike the Earth's, is cold. For a supposedly dead world, there's an awful lot of activity up there. On March 7th, 1971, a cloud of water vapor
Para lugar que parece que não tem porra nenhuma, aparentemente tem atividade pra caralho lá.
appeared on the moon that covered 100 square miles, and it was there for 14 hours before it dissipated. There's not supposed to be atmosphere on the moon, but for those 14 hours, there was. In fact, 6 astronomers in the past 100 years have documented a glowing mist in the crater named Plato. The same mist, the same crater, over many years. Boulder tracks are seen on the moon, all over the place. And that's weird enough, but how do boulders roll for miles and then go uphill, like in this photo? And since the days of Aristotle, astronomers have seen strange lights appear on the surface of the moon, sometimes visible with the naked eye. NASA even reported that between the years 1540 and 1967, there were 570 sightings.
A NASA afirma que entre os anos 1540 e 1967 teve 570 visões de luzes na Lua.
Michelin S. foi um período que coincide com o fim da Era do Gelo. Atualmente tem vários cientistas que acreditam na teoria que durante esse período houve uma sequência de impactos que causaram o derretimento da calota polar que ficava em cima da América do Norte.
Aí. Eu olho o chat e eu leio. Aí é putaria, pô. É putaria, mano. É a NASA. Isso aqui é a NASA. Isso aqui não é putaria. Isso aqui é a NASA. A legenda não tá errada. Eu escutei.
Appear on the surface of the moon, sometimes visible with the naked eye. NASA even reported that between the years 1540 and 1967, there were 570 sightings of light flashes on the moon that couldn't be explained. Sightings of strange lights continue to this day. The Aristarchus crater was photographed in 1992, and it shows a glowing blue light, now called the Blue Gem. And this anomaly has been seen by Earth-based telescopes every few years since. Some have even speculated it's a fusion reactor. And these events of mysterious light and mist happen so frequently that there's even a name for them, transient lunar phenomena, or TLPs. But things get even more weird. There are plenty of photographs of what appear to be artificial objects on the surface of the moon. Towers that reach several miles high, pyramids.
Opa! Há fotografias do que parecem ser objetos artificiais na Lua. Torres!
On the surface of the moon. Towers that reach several miles high.
Torres de
Pyramids,
de
symmetrical structures. These have been photographed by astronomers, probes, even the astronauts themselves. And the biggest anomaly of all? Why haven't we gone back to the moon? Sergeant Carl Wolf was working as a technician for the Air Force, and he was repairing equipment that transferred images from a lunar satellite. Those photos, according to Sergeant Wolf, showed artificial structures on the moon. What he
maluco da NASA tava estudando os bagulho e tem fotos de estruturas artificiais na Lua.
Described as a base, and this is corroborated by another technician working with Wolf. And Wolf wasn't a UFO, ET, moon theory guy.
O cara que tá falando não é um maluco doido com, meu irmão, chapéu de de celofane e o cacete. É um cara que trabalha na NASA. Os caras que trabalhavam na NASA.
Was just a tech. He said he was excited to see the pictures on the news and have NASA explain what they were. He was surprised when the photos never turned up. The photos were found in a very early release from NASA.
Sumiram com as
These
fotos.
structures are very large and very tall. You can even see they cast shadows. And these are photos I'd like to learn more about. But I can't. They no longer exist. Now, almost immediately after landing on the moon, the Apollo 11 crew said they saw something that shook them up. After landing on
E agora vai pra galera do Apollo 11 que foi pra Lua. A galera ficou bugadinha, viu?
but I can't. They no longer exist. Now, almost immediately after landing on the moon, the Apollo 11 crew said they saw something that shook them up. Watch the press conference they gave when they returned. These men aren't acting like they made history or had a life-changing experience.
It's a beginning of a new age.
Mano, tem alguma coisa errada com esse cara. Tem alguma coisa errada com esse cara. Tem alguma coisa errada com esse maluco, mano. Salve, Vab. Mano, tem alguma coisa errada com esse maluco, mano. Na moral.
Or had
Mano, o maluco acabou de voltar da Lua, irmão. Esse maluco acabou de voltar da Lua. Tá?
a life-changing experience.
It's a beginning of a new age.
They look sad, frightened, uncomfortable, even depressed. Why? Is there a reason we haven't returned to the moon? And could it be that the Apollo missions discovered something that ancient cultures knew centuries ago? Something that reputable scientists believe is the only answer to this list of mysteries. That the moon is not what it seems or what we've been told. The moon is hollow, artificially constructed, and appeared in Earth's orbit from somewhere else, far away.
Makes sense to me.
Does it make sense to you?
E aí, mano? E aí, mano? Mano, o cara mais cético, o mais cético aí. Mano, esse maluco, ele tá bugadinho, não tá? Sem maldade, esse maluco tá bugadinho, não tá? Admite, esse cara, ele tá meio... É o começo de uma nova era. Mano, o cara tá bugadinho, mano.
So what can science explain about the hollow moon spaceship theory?
Cadê a ciência
Well,
agora?
the formation of the moon is still unknown, so score theory 1, science 0. The density problem is said to be because after the giant impact, the Earth's upper mantle formed the moon. The mantle is much less dense than the core. Okay, the problem with this is the giant impact theory probably isn't what happened. And the theory about the Earth and the moon forming out of that big donut shape?
In geometry, that's called a torus.
Taurus. Well, that wouldn't explain the density discrepancy. We're told the moon ringing like a bell is because the moon is much less dense, and the moon's rock has much less water, so vibrations reverberate longer and farther. This can't be proven, but okay. The perfect eclipses? Well, here's where science wins. The eclipses aren't exact. They're close, but not perfect. Besides, the moon is drifting farther away from the Earth every year, so eclipses are becoming less and less perfect all the time. And whether the moon arrived 14,000 years ago or was formed billions of years ago, it was much closer to the Earth, so it was much larger in the sky. Now, NASA claims that we know the moon isn't hollow because of seismic observations. And that's fair, but it's still conjecture. Look, we don't know for sure what's at the center of the Earth, much less what's at the center of the moon.
If there's anything at all.
Right. Now, the structures are said to be shadows or optical illusions.
Nope.
And the lights are from meteor impacts or reflections from glassy patches on the surface.
Nope.
But the bottom line is this. Yes, the hollow moon spaceship theory is a wild one, I admit that. And many of the anomalies found on the moon can be explained. The explanations aren't perfect, but they're enough to satisfy skeptics. And I consider myself a skeptic. But I'm open-minded. I just want to know the truth.
O cara que tá contando tudo isso tá falando que ele é cético, mas ele tem mente aberta. Temos muito em comum, cara do vídeo.
When I started researching this story, I thought it would be a fun ride, a pure tinfoil hat experience that we could button up with science. That's not what happened. There's just so much unknown and unexplainable that something doesn't feel right about what we've been told about the moon. But as always, the space agencies and the governments they serve are very selective about the images and information they release. So I have a message for them. For NASA, the European Space Agency, Russia, China, Elon Musk, Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and anyone with the resources to put people back on the moon. The message is this: if you want us to believe your explanations, you're gonna have to prove it.
Então prova.
All right. What's this?
I got a sponsor.
You've got a
Aqui é
sponsor.
Ed, Ed do Surf Shark aí. Então tá aí, rapaziada. Tá aí, mano. Tá aí. Essa é a fita da Lua Oca aí, mano. Essa é a fita da Lua Oca, mano. Fica aí a reflexão, velho.